Well, welcome to part 2 of episode 33. This presentation is going to be on the interiors. If you haven't watched the exterior portion of this slide presentation, please go and see episode 32. This may be a little bit long, but I pretty much compiled this from all the inspections I've done in the past, and these have been some of the more common things I've been running across, and that's why I felt like I should put it as part of a presentation here. Not only that, but I've had people call me too after they purchased their house, asking me questions about subpanels, about the plumbing. And so I've included those slides in here as well. I have no doubt that a good part of this is going to be very informative to you. So please stay patient. And if there's parts in this that you already know, maybe it'll be a refresher for that. But thanks for being a part of this as well. And also, if you or anyone else need a home inspection, we also do general condition inspections for customers. We do them practically about one a year for some people, but you really should probably have one done every 2 years. I mean, this is a good way, to find out whatever latent issues may be haunting you in the background. We can find out what they are. And the good thing is it doesn't cost near as much as a standalone home inspection. So keep that in mind, and please take the time to watch this entire presentation. Thanks. Moisture is such a big problem in this area that I decided to make this slide the very first one. We have constant high humidity, and moisture is no doubt the #1 enemy of every house here in South Alabama. It's the #1 issue. And it's the #1 latent issue because this is a problem that no one believes they have. But I'll guarantee you that probably more than 90% of the people here have some form of moisture problems going on and they don't know it. And part of the reason why they don't know it is because they have no clue what the humidity is inside their house. It's an invisible issue. It's kind of like radiation. You can't see that either. And usually what happens is when you have high moisture levels in the house, it creates the latent problems in the wall cavities, in the attic, behind wall switches. That's where it hides, in the wall cavities themselves. And so that's why every homeowner should have one of these gauges right here, a humidity monitor. I recommend the wireless ones because you should be monitoring the humidity in your attic, your crawl space, your garage, any other areas that may be subject to high moisture content. So just know this, that this is a big problem here in South Alabama, and you need to take every measure to deal with it. If you purchased a new house, it can take anywhere from 9 to 12 months for it to dry out. All this lumber that's in there was wet when it came from the mill. It probably rained on it while it was on the job site, making it even more damp than what it was from the very beginning. But not only that, this slab here is poured concrete, and it's going to take this a while to dehydrate as well. So just know that if you have a new house, you can have some very moist conditions for 9 to 12 months. And that's on top of what you're doing as part of living to create high moisture levels as well. But the main thing is you want to get your humidity levels between 45 and 55%. That's really don't want to get it any higher than 55%. And the only way you're going to be able to gauge that is with the humidity monitor. Now, during this drying process, this is something you're probably going to want to know, is you may hear some pretty loud popping and cracking noises, and that's normal because that's the wood expanding and contracting from the drying process. And you may even see some small cracking in some of the drywall as a result of this. So just know that's part of the normal process of the house going through its growing pains. I'm amazed at how many newer houses are being built without externally vented range hoods. Usually what you see is a microwave that has a recirculating fan in it, and there's no ductwork going up to where it can be vented to the outside. And this is really a defect, in my opinion. It's not so much a defect with the microwave, it's a defect because of what's missing. All kitchens should be externally vented to the outside because the kitchen produces a large amount of moisture, and it also produces a large amount of heat. And so your range hood, if it also vents out heat and smoke as well. And that's why I've come into some houses and done inspections and find smoke detectors missing in the hallway. So if you have unvented range, this should be a high priority item to do. Probably want to do it in the wintertime when it's cooler in the attic so you can run the ductwork up there without burning up. But also go and see episode 19 on the potential dangers of microwave ovens. That's something you might find very interesting as well. But by the way, a lot of these microwaves have the apparatus at the top to where it can be externally vented. It's just been covered there. So just keep that in mind, that your kitchen can really create a lot of problems for your house if it's not externally vented. This is something I run into fairly frequently when I do home inspections. I always try to inspect underneath the kitchen sink. And even though I'm not required to move contents, this is one area where I normally will do it because it's such an important area to inspect. But you'd be surprised of how many kitchen sinks have active leaks behind it. And maybe even yours yourself and you don't even know it. And what happens is all this contents in the kitchen shelf here blocks it. You can't see back behind all this because this is blocking most of the backside area of the kitchen cabinet. And so often what happens, I'll take and move this stuff out of the way, and I can either see where it has past water damage or current water damage. So, and I'll run the water to see if it's coming out of any of the valves or the plumbing it here. And sometimes I don't find any leaking at all. And so you have to start wondering why they have these damp areas here, but there's no leaking in the plumbing. And that's because some of these sinks are not caulked around the outer edges. Now this one is, but a lot of sinks were installed probably by the homeowner who wanted a different style sink. And so there's just no caulking going around it. And what happens is when you're doing dishes, water splashes up into these areas and it leaks up underneath here and goes down in the cabinet below. And you don't never realize that's what's happened. So these sinks should be caulked on all sides, and also including this backsplash back here, because that's a really good area for water to get back behind that and come down. Now, another thing that can cause leaks in the cabinet area is if you're reaching for stuff down here, pulling stuff out to maybe go clean carpets or whatever, you may bump some of this plumbing here, and a lot of this stuff isn't put on too tight. So you can bump this P-trap, and now all of a sudden, you now have water leaking out of the P-trap, and you don't even realize that happened. But what's caused that to happen is by bumping this and knocking it loose. So you really need to take the time to occasionally take a good peek to the back side of your cabinets to see if there's any active water leaking going on there. If you bought a older house, say a house that's 20 or more years old, you'll run into these. This is called an angle stop, and you may have several of them underneath your kitchen sink. One probably goes to the dishwasher, and then the others go to the sink above. And you got to really be careful with these angle stops if they're old. You can see the corrosion here. And so if you were to go to try to turn this valve off, there's a very good chance it's going to leak. And so when I do inspections, I don't never fool with these for that reason. It can leak to the point where a plumber would actually have to be called to come fix it. And that's another reason why you need to know how to turn the water off at the main. Because if you inadvertently try to turn this off and this valve stem starts pouring water out, you now have a bigger problem you got to deal with. And that's why it's really important that you have a water meter key and keep your water meter box clean out there so you can access that valve there. And really the better option is to have a secondary ball valve cutoff so you can just go straight to that to turn the water off to the house. Another thing you see was, looks like they may have tried to have added more cutoff valves here at one point, and for whatever reason just gave up on it. But there's a hole that's been drilled here, and my theory is that they were going to run new plumbing here at one time and just never did. But if you have open holes like this, they should be sealed up. And because what can happen is if you do have a moisture problem back behind in the sink area, then it can leak into the wall cavity. And of course, insects and roaches, they kind of like moist areas, and that would give them the entry point into the cabinet area as well. I also recommend taking some boric acid, which comes in a plastic bottle. You can cut the tip of it and actually puff that powdered acid back behind this. And that's really effective for many different types of insects. But I also agree with these glue traps too. They really work good. And so you just need to be mindful to check these and throw them away occasionally. But they do work really good at catching pretty much every kind of insect there is out there. The primary ones I want to catch are the wolf spiders, which there's pretty much no way to get them other than a glue trap. You can see on the back wall, that's all black mold from having a long-term moisture leak in the cabinet. And that's probably been caused by water oversplashing the sink and dripping down the wall. So just be mindful to monitor the inside of your cabinets, including the bathroom cabinets too, because it's really no different than this. Okay, in this left photograph here, we have a garbage disposal, and I would say probably half the houses have them. Especially if it's a newer house, I think they make that part of the deal. I've never really had much luck with these. I think I've probably been through maybe 5 or 8 of those, and I don't even have it anymore because I just never could find a good model of these that actually worked. But if yours ever goes out and starts making a humming noise, there is a reset button on most of these that you can push and reset it, and sometimes that will clear the fault in that. You may have to unplug it and plug it back in. But I've generally found that I only got maybe 2 to 3 years service life out of all the ones I ever installed. On the right picture, you can see this is also a newer house. This also has PEX plumbing. This is what's taking the place of polybutylene. And this is PVC, and they also have a clean out cap here at the top, which is good for them to put that there, because now you actually have an access point right at the source to maybe clear a clog if one was to ever develop there. So this cap will unscrew, and you can either take a snake and snake it out, or maybe pour drain opener in this opening as well to clear the clog. So that's a good feature. Hopefully your kitchen sink has that. Okay, this is where it becomes important to know where all your breakers are and what they service. Eventually you're going to run into this. I had my brother-in-law just told me a few days ago that they had to replace their range because it wouldn't turn off. And he went out to the sub panel in the garage and turned every breaker off, and yet the oven was still on. And he didn't realize that what controlled the oven or the range was out on the outside of the house. So you can see on the right picture, this bottom one's marked stove. Well, that's pretty common in the newer houses. Some of the appliances that take 240 volts, those bigger breakers may be located at the main box on the side of the house and not on your sub panel. And that's another reason why these all should be marked as to what they control, so that when you have a problem like that where the oven or stove just doesn't turn off, you'll know where to go to kill the main breaker to it. It's really important to know where not only you, but everyone else in your family, because you might not be available when this issue arises. Okay, what we're looking at in the left photograph is the sub panel. And this is usually located in the garage or the laundry room, but it could be in other locations as well. This right set of breakers here, they have I don't know if you can see it, but there's these little buttons on the face of it. And these are test buttons. These breakers are either arc fault or ground fault, and some of them are both. They're both AFCI and GFCI. And so you're supposed to come out here periodically and push these buttons. They're test buttons to make sure that these breakers are functioning correctly. I read one article where they should be tested once a month, but they do need to be tested periodically. And on the right is the label, and it gives little spaces here to mark what each one of these breakers control. And I have found that some of the writing on here is not very legible. Sometimes they use pencil, it's hard to read. So if you just purchased a house and you haven't closed on it yet, you might want to get with a seller if you can't read their writing and see if you can't determine what all these labels are and that they're printed very legible to where you can read these, because you're definitely going to be coming out here to the sub panel at one point or another to either reset a breaker or to turn one off in case there's an emergency. You also don't want to mix match breakers. If you have one of these breakers go bad, really you should use an electrician anytime you get into this panel here. It's a pretty hazardous area. And also note that there's no main single breaker here. And the reason for that is because the main breaker that powers this is going to be on the outside of the house. So that's really important to know, that where the main breaker that controls this is. So if you go to the panel on the outside of the house, hopefully it's marked there main, or maybe marked sub panel. And if you trip that breaker, it should kill the power to this. And normally that's about a 100 amp breaker that's on that box. In the right photograph, you can see where this sub panel is just blocked by all kinds of contents in the shelf itself. And this really isn't good for obvious reasons. Number one, if you have a breaker that's been tripped, you now have to move all this stuff out of the way to get to the box. But even worse, if there was a real emergency, maybe there's a short in the box itself and creating a fire, you now have all this stuff that's a potential fire hazard as well. So panels shouldn't be blocked at any time and anywhere, whether it's this location here or on the outside of the house. Okay, this slide here is potentially going to save you a service call. You'll be surprised how many outlets like the one on the right are controlled by this outlet here, which is a ground fault. And for whatever reason, you may be in your bathroom and the bathroom has an outlet like this instead of a GFCI receptacle like that. And you turn on your hair dryer and all of a sudden, boom, no power. And so you go out to the panel in your garage, and some of them could be controlled by the ground fault receptacle there, or ground fault breaker there. But often it's another GFCI receptacle on the other side of the house that's controlling this one on the opposite side of the house. And so what happens is they can't find where it's been tripped, so they call an electrician to come out and have to pay, however much they charge to do a service call to locate the problem of why you don't have power at your outlets in that bathroom anymore. And it may take him a while to find it as well. And of course, they charge by the hour, and you're going to be really ticked off when you find out that what controlled this outlet here was this GFCI receptacle in the bathroom on the opposite side of the house. And so what you would do to reset that is push this reset button, and now you got power back to this outlet on the opposite side. So just know that these GFCI receptacles can control other receptacles inside the house and even outside the house. So if you have exterior outlets out there, they may be controlled by a GFCI receptacle inside the house. So this is some very good information. It's probably going to save you some money on a service call knowing this. If you're lucky enough to have natural gas, well, it comes with its hidden dangers as well. This one here has a pretty good blue flame going around it. If you start seeing yellow flames, that tells you that these orifices are getting dirty. But you also want to have a cutoff valve for your stove arranged. And it's going to look like this here on the right. And if you have the valve turned crossways like this, that should be the off position for it. And often these shutoff valves are going to be underneath the cabinet, so you're going to have to look for it, have to get a flashlight to maybe find where that shutoff valve is. Hopefully you have one there as you're supposed to. But that's another reason why you need to know how to turn the gas off at the main, which that you can see that in the exterior presentation we did of how to turn the gas off. So, natural gas has no smell at all. They add a substance to it called mercaptan, and that's what gives it its scent, its strong smell, so that you'll know that you've got a gas leak. So also you want to have a carbon monoxide detector. If you have natural gas in your house, you definitely want to keep working up-to-date CO detectors. And even if you don't have natural gas, if you have an attached garage, you want to have working CO detectors for that reason. So just know, and also take the time to locate where this gas valve is in your cabinets in case there's ever an issue with your gas range. Okay, in the picture on the left, that's a carbon monoxide detector. And you want to keep these up to date and make sure that these are working. It's probably a good idea to have more than one of these as well too. The one on the right is a smoke detector, and you can see all this yellowing. Well, they intentionally make this plastic for smoke detectors to where they will yellow. And that's a good color indicator that these are past their service life. So there's really no need to even try to go and look at the date on these. If you see that this is yellow, it's past its service life and it's time to be replaced. And I recommend that you add communicating smoke detectors if you don't already have them. And these are detectors that when one goes off, it communicates with the others and it starts sounding the alarm on those as well. So the communicating smoke detectors are probably the better ones to use for safety. But I know we tend to want to not think about this too much, fire safety, but the fact of the matter is, I mean, you can pretty much turn the news on and you can see where someone's house has burned to the ground. And unfortunately, we see in some cases where people's died, and it's usually from a lack of having working smoke detectors. Not that they didn't have them, it's just they just wasn't working. And we tend to think, well, that's not me, that's something that happens to someone else on the news. But the truth of the matter is that can be you. It can be me too. So I do take the time to make sure that my smoke detectors and CO detectors are up to date and working. And I hope that you will do the same as well. Fire extinguishers are not part of my inspection. I don't never go and check to see if they're there or not. But it's a good idea to have them. And you're going to really wish you had one if you have a fire inside the house. In fact, you're going to probably be mad at yourself if there was a fire inside the house and it took the fire department 10, 15 minutes to get there, and you could have had the fire probably even put out yourself. And so now half your home is destroyed or completely destroyed just from the lack of not having working fire extinguishers. And these are really inexpensive. I mean, you can pick them up at Walmart and Lowe's, Home Depot. They're not that expensive at all. I kind of go a little bit overboard. I have one in the kitchen, but also have about 4 of these water extinguishers mounted on the outside of the house. And these are 3-gallon extinguishers. And the good thing is they're refillable. You can refill them yourself with a water hose. And they have a little Schrader valve on it. That's like what's on the tire on your car. So you can air it up with the air compressor and pressurize these up. And that's the gauge up here telling you that it's charged. And I've had to use these before. I got lucky and found these at a yard sale, and I figured why not pick them up. And I said, that yard sale really has saved me some grief because I had a fire out there by my shed. It was during the fall, and somehow or another some leaves caught on fire out there in the driveway, and they were burning underneath my car too. And that's partly my fault too for not keeping the driveway blown off. And the water hose was on the opposite side of the house. I didn't have a hose bib on that side as of yet. So this water extinguisher saved my car from burning up. And so I guess it goes to show that you really can't go overboard when it comes to fire safety. So Keep this in mind. Definitely at least have some fire extinguishers to service the inside. Another quick fire tip, if you're going on vacation or even just going to work and nobody's going to be home during the day, it's a good idea to keep all the doors closed because this will greatly reduce the spread of fire. The two biggest moisture areas in your house is the kitchen and the bathrooms. And you notice how even in new construction that they tend to want to put bathroom fans in the new bathrooms, but they don't want to put it in the kitchen. So, it makes you wonder why that is. But anyway, you need to make sure that your bathroom fans run at least 10 minutes after each bath or shower. Now on the ceiling here, you can see these dark areas on both sides of it. And my vibe on this here is more than likely that there's no ductwork connected to this. And so when it's pulling in moisture, it's just dumping it on the top side of the drywall. And this is moist, all this here is. And so this is probably going to lead to mold. And it may even already be mold on the top side of this. If you look at this light fixture, you can see some rust along the outer edges. And that's just simply from moisture piling up inside the bathroom. And anytime that happens, if there's any metal that's going to rust it. But even worse is that it can create mold upon the ceiling and wall areas. Another thing I find too in some bathrooms is that these fans are undersized for the size area that it's supposed to service, or there's just simply not enough bathroom fans in there to begin with if it's a very large bathroom. So just know that this is a big problem area for moisture. And if you don't allow these fans to run long enough, when you open up the bathroom door, well, now moisture is going to come into the rest of the house and create issues there. And this left photograph is a thermal image of a bathroom exhaust fan. It's not connected to any kind of duct work, so when moisture comes into it, it's just simply dumping that moisture on the top side of the drywall. And that's what this dark blue area is water that's piled up there. In the right photograph, you can see where it's been ducted to the exterior of the building, which is a good thing. Some of these contractors just let them duct like this or even run the duct work to where it runs out to the soffit area of the house. But at least on this house, they ran the duct work to an exterior vent, which is the right thing to do. But you can tell that these are kind of cheap plastic made exhaust points. This louver's actually stuck open right there. But not only that, but this is cheap plastic, and the sun's eventually just going to dry rot that out. So really, at some point, if you have this, you're probably going to want to put a higher quality exhaust point here. Toilets don't have to be caulked at the base, but they just should be. And the reason for that is you don't really have to caulk the far back side of it. In fact, it'd probably be good if you left maybe a 1 or 2 inch gap back behind it. But they really should be caulked along the baseline here, all the way around. And for several reasons. One's like if you have, water spills on the floor, it doesn't migrate up underneath this. But it also helps keep the toilet secure to the floor and keeps it from moving. You also, again, want to be very wary of these shutoff valves, especially if they're 20 years old or older. You can see where this is all rusted up. And if you were to try to turn this thing, there's probably a 50% chance this is going to leak. And it could leak there again to the point to where you may have to go cut the water off to the house. And these angle valves can be a pain to replace because often it's corroded where it's threaded as well, and you may even have to cut the pipe and resolder or reconnect a new fitting here in order to get a new valve there. So just be very wary of these cutoff valves. In fact, that might be a good project to do in the summertime. I try to do all my indoor projects during the hot time of the year, and that might be something you might want to consider doing, is replacing all the angle stops if they're really old. And I recommend replacing them with a quarter turn or half turn shut off. That way you don't have to keep turning and turning the valve to get it to cut off. Okay, what you're looking at in this photograph is the right kind of plunger to use on the toilet. It should have this little horn deal. And the way this would work, it's kind of hard to describe this vocally without showing you in person. I'm going to create a video on the best ways to unclog toilets and sinks. And I used to be a plumber, so I have a few tricks up my sleeve that I can share with you. But in this case here, what you're supposed to do with this type of plunger is allow water to go up into this and pretty much take and scoop water into this so it's got both water and air inside this cup. And then push hard. This here, taking it and pushing it at an angle and keep pushing and keep pushing. You may have to keep refilling this with water as you do that to clear whatever kind of clog that may be in the toilet. I just replaced my toilets not too long ago, and you can't find any of the higher capacity toilets anymore. They just don't make them. So you're kind of stuck with the low water usage toilets, which doesn't have a whole lot of power, a whole lot of flushing power. And so I did a lot of research since I couldn't get a high capacity toilet and what the best one was out there. And I think this Kohler Santa Rosa model is a really good option because so far these have really performed well. Another thing I like about this, it's all one piece. You got to realize that if you have a two-piece toilet, there's also another donut gasket that goes in between that, and that's just another leak point. So I highly recommend the Kohler Santa Rosa model. I think it's one of the better ones out there. It does have a very good amount of flushing ability based on the limited amount of water that it holds in the tank. It's got really good reviews. They are more expensive than your average toilet. I think these cost pretty close to $300 a piece. But the good thing is you have a toilet that works, and it's probably going to give you some pretty good service life as well. But Kohler's also a good brand. Okay, staying in a bathroom, if you have a tub spout that you can see gaps like this, you should really caulk around this tub spout area, because what will happen is as water splashes down from showers and splashing around in the bathtub, this water can migrate back behind this wall cavity, and you can really have some substantial mold issues forming behind the wall as a result of that. And it also goes for around these valve stems as well. If there's any sort of gapping back behind this, that should be caulked too. Down on the floor level, if you have this kind of gapping around the bathtub or even around the wall areas, it looks like it's fairly well sealed here, but on this part, you can see some pretty good gapping. All this should be caulked around the base too, because if you step out of the shower, then of course bathrooms are generally wet areas. You know, water can migrate up underneath this and create all kinds of problems, including mold problems in the wall cavities. So just keep that in mind to make sure that all these open areas get caulked. One of the best things you can do for small closets is to add this product called Damp Rid. This is widely available. You can find it at Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot. And the best thing about these Damp Rid buckets is they can be refilled. You can buy the big packs of refill for them. And also another good idea is if you have closet doors, especially if they're small closets, is to cut holes in the bottom of these doors and add these grills. So that way air can circulate out of these. This is a very bad area for moisture to pile up in. And so they should be both ventilated like this and also have the Damp Rid. Even with my closet doors being ventilated, I have to dump these buckets about once every 2 months. I mean, this bucket right here will have half full of water in just 2 months' time. And that's having a house where I'm actually been OCD about keeping the humidity between 45 and 50%. So you'll be amazed of how much water these Damp Rid buckets will absorb. In fact, that's probably the better way to determine if you have a humidity problem. You know, outside of using humidity monitors, which I highly recommend you do. But if you buy these Damp Rid buckets and put them in your closets, put one up there in about 30 days, see how much water's in this bucket. You're going to be amazed of how much water these Damp Rid buckets can produce. Like I say, you know, humidity is an invisible problem. It's kind of like radiation. You can't see it. And so one of the ways I think people start getting some hints about they might have a problem is you get up in the morning, you take a shower and you dry off and you hang your towel up and you go to work and you're there 8 hours. And so basically 10 hours pass and you come home and you see your towel hanging on the bathroom door and you say, well, I'm gonna go ahead and take this towel and put it in the washing machine. And when you pick it up, it feels like you just dried off with it 10 minutes ago. It's really, really, really damp. And so you start thinking, I wonder who used my towel to dry off. Well, what it is that you've got very high humidity in the house and the towel can't dry because the air in the house is so saturated with moisture it can't dry. And usually this is one of the latent ways people kind of find out that if they read between the lines that they may have a really bad moisture problem inside the house. And if you notice the humidity gauge here, it's reading 93% humidity. That's really, really high. But often it doesn't take that high of humidity to create a damp towel that lasts 8 or 10 hours. It can be around 70% humidity to cause this to happen. The humidity inside the house should be 45 to 55% max. And really the more comfortable you're going to feel, especially during the summertime, is around 45% humidity. And that's where I try to keep my house, is right about 45%. Because the more damp the air is inside the house, the hotter you're going to feel. And that's why a lot of people complain about their air conditioning, is that they kind of sort of feel comfortable during the daytime when they're in the living room watching TV, but when they go to bed at night, for whatever reason, they're hot. And so they crank the air conditioner down even further, but that's the only control you have, is that thermostat. But really what the major problem is you got high humidity, and as a result, you feel hotter. On the right, you see the humidity station I was talking about earlier. This is a wireless model, and this is the sensors that come with it. And so you can take these sensors here, put one in the garage, one in the attic. They make these expandable. So if you have a crawl space or a basement, one of those should definitely go there as well. But really the better way to do these is to have one sensor on the outside too, because you want to be able to compare what the humidity is out there based on what the humidity is in the crawl space or garage and that sort of thing. These base stations also serve as a monitor too, so you don't have to have a separate one of these inside the house. And the top reading here would be what the temperature and humidity is inside the house, and then down below would be where these stations are placed. These are relatively inexpensive. You can find them online. And so I would go and look at the reviews on these particular models, make sure you get a fairly decent one. But the only way you're ever going to know that you've got a problem is to put one of these in. That's why I call this the invisible problem that no one thinks they've got. And the reason they don't believe they have it is because they have no way of monitoring it. And so this is really important that you do this. It's the most important thing here in South Alabama, since it's the #1 enemy. Okay, here's your air conditioning system here, or your HVAC system, and you have these return air grills. They're either located in the ceiling or in the wall or both. And hopefully, if you have a large enough house, you'll have more than one return. And really, in theory, every room should have its own return, even though they don't do it. They're just simply not going to take the time and expense to put a return in every room, but even though it probably should have that. But it's also equally important that you keep your filters changed out. On the right photograph, you can see that this filter is pretty darn dirty. I mean, it's probably hadn't been changed in months. And during the summertime, since we do run our air conditioners more, these really should be changed every 30 days, regardless of what the filter says. I mean, some of these filters state 90 days, but really they should be changed every 30 days. And you also want to kind of resist using these high MERV filters that filter out the tiniest of particles, because basically what that does is restricts the airflow coming into the system, and that's something you don't want to do. Now, what I did is I don't use paper filters at all anymore. I use washable filters that I purchased online. They're more expensive, But the good thing is you save money in the long run because you're not constantly having to go to the store and buy filters. So you will save money even though they're more expensive. But when you wash them out, you don't want to put these in there wet, the washable filters. And that's why I do keep some paper filters on hand so I can put the paper filter in while the metal filters are drying out. So always maintain your filters for your HVAC system because this can greatly affect the performance of it. Well, this is what's on the back side of your filter or your return grill. This is called the evaporator coil. It's also called the A coil because it makes this A configuration. You can see that this coil is extremely dirty. It's got a lot of dust on it. And also mold can form on these fins and also the dust itself. And that's why you want to have your HVAC system serviced twice a year. And hopefully your service technician will examine these coils and clean them as needed, because if they're not clean, then this will greatly diminish the performance of the cooling of the house. And it's really important that you keep these evaporator coils clean and also the filters cleaned and replaced as well, because if dust and dirt starts passing through that, then this is what can happen. It starts piling up here on these fins. In the right photograph, you can see in the closet inside the house where the main duct goes up through the ceiling that there's this huge gap right there. And I find this more often than you would think. I can't believe that they would run this here and leave these large wide gaps coming what's called the chase. And there should be no gaps coming through here, because what this does, it allows air transfer from the attic into this or vice versa. So either way, it's not good. And on a side note, you see these little curlicue bulbs are really a CFL bulb. You know, try to avoid these at all costs. I mean, especially as cheap as LEDs become. These bulbs are burned pretty hot. I think I've measured these at 215 degrees. And so there's just no reason to have these bulbs. So get rid of them and replace them with LED. Okay, remember the damp towel I talked about a few slides ago? Well, usually this is another way homeowners discover they've got a high humidity problem inside the house, and they'll look up and they'll see that these registers are sweating and got droplets of water on them. And that tells you that you got pretty high humidity inside the house. And what's happening is moisture rises much like helium does. And so it rises up and it touches the cold surface of this register and it condenses. It makes dew point and turns it back into a water form. And what happens is dust, you know, some dust actually comes through these vents, and if it's damp here, well, then dust will start sticking to this, and it can also stick to the inside of the ductwork as well. And then now mold can develop here as well. And the right photograph is a really good example of this. Drywall is porous. I mean, it can hold water much like a sponge. It also has paper on it too. And so paper and wood and cardboard and other fibrous products like that is actually food for mold. That's what they feed on. And so what's happened here is the same thing. Is there's high humidity in the house, and the water's made dew point here on this register, and it has soaked this portion of drywall. And so now mold has everything it needs to thrive. It's got a cool, damp area with paper on the drywall for a food source. And so that's why you really need, there again, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but you really need to monitor what the humidity levels in the house are. You're never going to know that this is a problem unless you do it. If you haven't watched the episode on exteriors, please go and do so, because this kind of ties that in. That's why it's really important that you have to maintain the exterior doors, especially on the outside frames of it. That's where I usually find a lot of moisture problems and rot. And if you allow that to stay unprotected out there or in a rotted state, what happens is the moisture since it is attracted to dry areas, it starts coming in through the house, coming from outside in, and so it just wicks its way all the way around, and now it's even into the baseboard here. And it could be into the studs inside the wall. In fact, there may even be mold there. In the right photograph, you can see mold above this outlet. And so what's happened is there's air getting in through the outside wall at some point. And so the only way it knows how to get back into the house is through this outlet area because it's an opening. And so drywall there again is porous. And so it's now using the paper in this wall area as a food source, the mold is. And this is a moisture meter here. And this was actually taken 2 weeks without any rainy weather. So it's 20% moisture right here after 2 weeks of no rain. So you can imagine how, if I'd have been there 2 weeks earlier, this would probably been registering up 40, 50, 60% moisture. So that's why it's important to maintain the outside structure of the house so that no moisture can get into the wall cavity and wick its way inside. One of the reasons why we have such a bad termite problem here in South Alabama is because of the moisture there again. Termites love moist areas. And usually, I don't do a termite inspection, but I try to look out for them when I do an inspection. And I kind of sort of want to pay a little bit more attention to these windowsill areas. That's tend to where I seem to find them more often. And this picture on the left, I don't know if it's too visible, because you see kind of indented here. And not only that, but there's termites laying out there on the windowsill. And the right photograph, it's real spongy, real soft, and I could take this little owl here and push through it. So there's definitely termite activity or past termite activity in these windowsills. And I think part of the reasons why they tend to want to go here is because usually the windowsills are the lowest thing to the ground level in some cases. So, this can be an area that can be hidden from view, and especially, you could actually have termites there and have visible areas where there's damage, but you can't see it because blinds now come down and cover all this. And that's why it's a good idea to occasionally go around and check your windowsills and kind of press around, kind of push on some of these areas to see if it's soft, to see if you might have any kind of termite problems. Just don't rely on your termite man to come around and do his inspection. He may not be looking in all these areas, and so 2 sets of eyes are always better than one. So do your due diligence as well and do your own termite inspections, because this can get out of hand really quick and cause tens of thousands of dollars in damage. It can really destroy the house if you don't stay on top of this. So do your due diligence and then do your own inspections. And also too, go around at least twice a year and try to open and close all your windows. If you don't do it to any other windows, do it to your bedroom windows, because if there ever was a fire, you're going to need to get those windows open and get out. But not only that, there's going to come a time to where you're probably going to want to open up all the windows maybe in the fall or the winter time to air out the house. And it's simply the lack of not opening and closing these windows and exercising them that keeps them from opening up and getting stuck. Okay, you probably may have still one of the old style tank water heaters. It may be natural gas or electric, but you may also notice that has this tank on top of it, and that's called an expansion tank. And what that's there for is to absorb the pressure differences in the plumbing system. And these pressure differences can be caused by the expansion of the water in the tank, but can also be caused by a faulty pressure reducing valve at the meter. So there's several ways that your system can get variances in pressure. Well, instead of the pipes having to absorb all that, that's what this tank is put there for, to take up that difference in pressure. And it has a baffle inside of this, like a little bladder. And the way it's supposed to work is you put air in this, and the air should be in here equal to what the pressure is coming into the house. So if you have 60 psi coming in of water pressure, then this tank should be aired up to 60 psi. And so in part of my inspections, I come and I test these tanks to make sure that it has air inside of it. But also sometimes when I put the gauge on, if water comes out, that tells me that the bladder in here has failed. And so these tanks should be replaced if that's happened. If you don't have this tank on your water heater, then it should have it, because it's now most municipal codes require that a backflow prevention device be put on every meter, which prevents water from coming back out of the house into the city system. And so now the pressure is trapped on your side of the house, and so pressure can build up within the plumbing system as a result of having no place to go. So there's a really good reason to have these expansion tanks put on your plumbing system. It's really there to protect it, and it should be tested as a result. If you notice, this tank's been put on upside down, not that that really matters too much, but what the problem is that you can't get to this cap to remove it to test it to see if it's got air in the tank or if that the bladder's still good. And so they need to be tested periodically to make sure that they're functioning. So just know that's what these tanks are there for. And if you don't have one, you probably want to have one put in. They're about $50 to $70 depending on the model. Not all inspectors do this, but I do it as part of my inspection because it is important to know, what kind of water pressure you have coming into the house. Now on this particular home, I measured 118 psi, which is an enormous amount of water pressure. And it also told me that the pressure reducing valve at the street was most likely defective. And it's all the more reason to have that expansion tank mounted on your water heater to kind of absorb these high pressure levels when they do occur. In the right photograph, you can see which is PEX coming into the soffit area. And yeah, it is mostly warm year round down here, but it does drop down to freezing even into the teens. In fact, I remember in 1985, it got down to around 5 degrees, and it really busted a lot of people's pipes in areas they never would think they would bust. So anytime you have plumbing, whether it be PEX, PVC, or copper, it should be insulated within the first 3 to 4 feet before it makes any kind of entrance into the attic area. Also, you don't allow any kind of plumbing to be directly exposed, especially PEX, to the outside elements, because the UV light, even indirect UV light, can deteriorate this plumbing product. This photograph on the left is an attic staircase that goes into the attic, and so these are normally located in the hallways. Some of them in the garage, and some you may have more than one attic entrance. And when I open up these staircases, I look along these frames here, and what appears to be overspray from where they sprayed the ceiling is really white mold. That's what that is. It's white fungus or mold or mildew that's formed along this outer edge. And that's from moisture rising up, and it's coming in, and this is actually a cooler porous area, so it's allowed it to form there. And usually after I get the attic door open and look straight up above, you can see on the decking here, the roof decking, where the mold has also formed itself there too, because mold and mildew feed on wood and paper products. That's the food source for them. So it's not uncommon to see this directly above the attic staircase on the roof decking. So if you see this, you need to, take measures to control the indoor humidity, but you also want to go ahead and get this killed and removed too. Attics are usually very hot regardless of how well they're vented. And that's why in Florida, some of the newer home builders are actually not even ventilating the attics at all. They're fully encapsulating them and actually having some of the ductwork cool the attic so it becomes a conditioned space like the inside of the house. And I think that's what they should do to all new houses. There's really no good way to ventilate attics, especially here in South Alabama, because of the constant high humidity that's outside. Pretty much what you're doing is you're venting moist air into the attic. But not only that, but we just from living inside the house, since moisture rises, it wants to go inside the attic as well. And so any moisture that's in this attic, if you have ductwork running through it, even if it's really well insulated ductwork, it can still reach dew point here on this insulation. And that's what you're seeing at the bottom, is where moisture is made dew point and is dripped down onto the drywall below. So if you have sweating ducts in the attic, that's something you might want to go up and take a look at, especially during the summertime, to see if other measures may need to be taken up there to get more air draft going through it, or maybe even put a dehumidifier in the attic, which is what I had to do. In the right photograph, you can see where this duct, this is actually coming from a bathroom ventilation fan, and it's just laying right there at the soffit area. So this is dumping a lot of moisture into the attic, and you can see it's really dark back here. That's probably mold there, but it's also probably white mold here. And so this is the worst thing you can do with your bath fans, is to allow them to vent into the attic. They should be vented completely to the exterior portion of the building. Well, thanks for taking the time to watch the slide presentation. I did not go over every single thing that you probably should know. I've created a lot of other videos that specifically get into details about some of the more specific things that you probably would want to explore, because these things do affect your house and the value of it, and also the health and safety and well-being of your family. So whenever you get time, please go to Southern Home Talk, our YouTube channel, and we address all these specific issues, and hopefully they'll be helpful to you. And also take the time to go look at the exterior slide presentation that we did. That's a whole different separate episode. We split it up in two different ways because we understand that nobody really wants to watch a very long presentation, even though this has been somewhat long in itself. And I've made every effort to try to condense this as much as possible, and I've left quite a bit out as a result. So most of what was put in this slide presentation was some of the most important things that I run into as a home inspector. So I felt like they all should be in here, even though you may know some of what we went over. But thanks for watching, and please subscribe to Southern Home Talk. And if you know anyone out there that needs an inspection, please have them call us. We also do general condition inspections too, which doesn't cost anything near like a full-blown home inspection. And you probably do want to get one of these done about once a year, or maybe once every 2 years at the most, because we can come in and probably find a lot of these latent issues before they become big problems. So there again, thanks for watching, and please call South Alabama Home Inspections at 251-490-9892.